You're listening to another episode of the Philly Sports Jabronis. Tonight's podcast is being recorded live at Nipper's Bar and Pizza on Main Street in Jeffersonville, Pennsylvania. And now, on with the show. Philly Sports Jabronis. I'm Joe Dara with Jamie Toman, Rob Sr., Mike Greger, and Carlos Slade.
What's up, ladies?
Full house. Full house for the Jabronis tonight.
Full house over here.
Yeah, it literally is a full house. We got three on one side of the table and two on the other. Right? That would be a full house?
It would.
Okay,
It's
a football, quote-unquote, Thursday of sorts for us. We're recording this live on Tuesday evening from Nippers. You may be listening to us on Friday afternoon, syndicated podcast radio. Of course, you can always hear us on The Grueling Truth and access us on iTunes and iHeartRadio as well. So with obviously with Thanksgiving this week, we figured, well, I guess, kind of sort of put our heads together and thought maybe a Tuesday evening podcast would be more efficient as opposed to coming out with the lunatics on Wednesday night.
Okay.
Yeah, let's hope so.
Or I was going to say, who's kidding ourselves? Anyone going to go out tomorrow night?
Amateur hour.
Yeah,
too old for that.
Yeah, I retired from that a few years ago.
That's what everyone says on Tuesday.
It's
Then Wednesday
true.
comes around, it's like, hey, let's get an 8-ball. It'll last us all weekend. Okay, a lot to get into tonight, and hopefully we can figure out a way within our hour here to maybe even go a little bit beyond our typical football routine. As we know, the Eagles are, I guess, from a positive standpoint, giving us less and less to talk about as the weeks go on. But the 76ers are keeping things exciting for us, and for baseball purposes, the 2019 ballot was released today for Major League Baseball Hall of Fame. Sports writers and former late great Philadelphia Philly Roy Halladay is on the list, so we'll try to at least touch a little bit on where we think his chances are of potentially being a first ballot guy, and for that record, for that matter, whether we think he deserves to be there. So a lot to cover here this week. So let's get into it. And who wants to take the bait? Someone try to explain to me how, sitting here this evening, I can feel worse about the Philadelphia Eagles than I did roughly 7 days ago.
There's about 48.
5 days ago.
There's about 48 reasons for that. Basically, looked like a scene from Oz. And when things like that happen, then you tend not to be excited about your team. I didn't expect them to win that game, but I expected definitely a better showing. I thought they would actually sit there and put up some sort of fight, and they just laid on their stomachs and took it. So sorry for the graphic description there, but it is what it is.
I was expecting backs blown out again. Now they're on their bellies.
Nah. Hey, well, you can still blow somebody's back out. That's fine.
He's real sorry for this graphic description.
Get creative.
Let me elaborate.
But yeah, I understand the secondary is decimated, and I understand you got injuries out the wazoo. But it was one of those moments where the Tom Janovich sort of thing. Never underestimate the heart of a champion. Champ just got stomped out. So I don't know where to go from there if you're an Eagles fan. I mean, the schedule gets a little bit lighter, even though you still have to face the Rams at some point. You have plenty of time to sit there and still catch up and win that division, because the division still sucks out loud, and no one's going to run away with it. And the team that's in first place right now just had their quarterback break his leg in like 20 bajillion different places. And about the only thing we really have to worry about now is all of a sudden surging Cowboys team, which I didn't see coming.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, Redskins still hold a game in the division, but it feels like it's the Cowboys' division to lose. Absolutely.
I mean, I think the big thing, like Carlos said, is how heartless and pathetic that they looked. But if you can't really jump off the bridge yet because of how bad the division is.
Right.
Like, Redskins are done. They're not going to win another game. They just signed Mark Sanchez to be the backup quarterback. Like,
yeah, good luck.
They're done. As bad as the Eagles team has been, they almost beat the Cowboys 2 weeks ago. So the Cowboys aren't the elite of anything right now. I mean, they're probably the best team in the division, but they're very beatable. And the Eagles get the Giants, which should be an easy win this week. I know they're surging, but they played nobody for this win streak they're on. So if you want to stay positive, there's still a chance they could make the playoffs, win the division, but they're not going anywhere once they get in, if they got in.
I mean, I remember we did the preseason show, and we talked about our picks, and probably the one thing, and the only thing I got right, was when I said Dallas is going to challenge for this division. I just didn't picture it happening like this. I thought they were going to be a lot better than they are.
Right.
I didn't think the Redskins would be anything close to what they are. And while you had to expect the Eagles to level off somewhat, this is more of a crash and burn. It's like that game in London was like the disappointment bowl. My God, 7 wins combined between those two teams, who a lot of people thought was going to be a Super Bowl preview. It's is it just a regression from last year? I don't know. I think there's more to it than that, but as Rocky said, how did everything that was so good get so bad?
Yeah.
You know?
Well, they kept making them. They kept making those moves.
Well, that's a totally different story. But, all the guys who got hurt last year had replacements come in and play as well, if not better, than the original starter. This year, replacements are playing like replacements, and I don't think it gets much simpler than that.
I think something else that needs to be said too is we might be learning, or might have learned, that Frank Reich is a really, really, really good coach.
Look at Indianapolis right now.
Look at what Indy's doing right now. They're still putting numbers on the board, and they just get better as the season goes on. I see Doug Peterson trying to do some of the same things he did last year with nowhere near as much success. Maybe there's something to be said there.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, Reich is the flavor of the month right now as far as coaches go, but you don't have to look any further than Peterson to see how long that lasts. If they start out cold next year, or if they go in the tank in December, last year, the start of the year, Lombardi, he called Peterson, infamously the worst coach in the NFL. 6 months later, the guy was on top of the world.
Right.
Maybe the truth is somewhere in the middle.
Yeah, I think DiFilippo being gone hurts almost as bad as Reich.
Another one.
As well, especially when it comes to Carson. Though I'm not holding Carson to blame as much as I've heard on radio the last couple of days, where it's we were too soon to anoint him, this great quarterback. But it's hard to be a great quarterback when you're getting sacked a millisecond after the snap arrives in your hand, because your offensive line is just a turnstile at this point. And a lot of that comes back to Doug. He needs to design some plays to roll Carson out, or do something to give him a little bit of time to try to make a play happen. And I think, it was Joe and I last week, I'd said I think that the division is a lock thing and sailed already, and they did nothing obviously on Sunday to change my mind about that. I wouldn't be shocked if they drop 2 of these 3 division games coming up. Every one that they're playing, well, they haven't played Washington yet, but both New York and Dallas are playing better than they were when the Eagles played them, and even then they were 1-1. So if the proof is in the pudding, I had 1 game left that I didn't sell for the year, which was Houston, and yesterday I listed them for sale at a deep discount. So anyone hit me up.
Discount.
Anybody wants to go to Houston, hit me up. I'll give you a good deal on it. I don't think they're going to sell for what I have them listed on to begin with, which is far less than I usually take. But so we shall see. But it's looking bad. 3 division games and then the Rams coming up. We're probably sitting here mid-December and talking about Fultz's shoulder and whatever else we're going to talk about.
They got every reason to pack it in, but one to keep going, and it's the only one that matters, which is who scares you, Alex Smith turned into Theismann Jr. the other day.
Yeah, how about did you see the specs on, the commonalities between that injury?
Same day, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was the anniversary of, I think, yeah.
And
both happened at the 32-yard line. And they lost the game 23-21 on both occasions.
And the time element,
the
time element of the game was also similar. Right?
It's eerie. But and the other 2 teams are either owned by Jerry Jones or quarterbacked by Eli Manning. I mean, there's every reason to pack it in for the season and just say, well, everything went right last year, everything's going wrong this year. Let's come back next year and meet in the middle somewhere. But look, we all know what's going to happen if they make the playoffs. Get a home game against Chicago, Carolina, somebody like that. Who knows? Home field advantage maybe carries you. then you go to L.A. or New Orleans in the second round and you take your body bag with you. And that's the case for any of the teams that come out of this division.
And that's the thing, Rob, I kind of felt like this time last week, I kind of felt like pretty close to what you were saying about how, number one, who scares you. So let me focus on that part for a second, because the whole who scares you thing. I was even saying this time last week that as bad as the Eagles had looked recently, which did not account for the Saints game yet, I was of the mindset that if they were going to have to go up against the Saints, they might as well do it with their backs up against the wall, and meanwhile the Saints bubble just waiting to be burst. From an ebb and flow standpoint, aside from the fact that they were on the road, I was liking the way this was shaping up for them.
Everything about that was a good spot for Philly, except for being at the Superdome. That's it.
So we thought they don't, and again, injuries. We've covered the landscape of injuries. We've talked about the personnel changes, but still, I mean, to me, the way they didn't show up to that game, being the defending champions, injuries and personnel losses aside, now I really wonder if there's just enough fight in the squad to even rebound in a terrible division. The Giants game coming up this week, I have a little pause on it. Even if you just gloss over the fact that the Eagles are just not playing good football right now, the offense looks like it just really just cannot get its act together. Even with the acquisition of Golden Tate, I mean, that's part of the problem here. Like they go out and get a good receiver. A couple weeks ago, on paper we were saying, wow, this is going to turn around their season, and it kind of has to the opposite effect. Like he's now, not that you obviously could blame him for anything, but he's a glaring example of how this offense just isn't working. Because he can't fit in. And that's not to say that it's his fault. I mean, they're the scheme or whatever, but I just with the way this Giants game is coming into play here, I don't see this team, even if they were elite, winning every game but one or two in the division. It's hard to win 4 or 5 games in your division. You've already beat the Giants. Now you got this game at home, but even before you factor in what Mike mentioned about the Giants winning 2 in a row, and granted, I don't think any of us are thinking that it's that they've turned their season around. Look at the opponents that But I don't know how I like this game shaping up for the Eagles, based on the fact that they already beat the Giants and they kind of struggled a little bit. Well, now, I mean, that was like a 34 to.
I mean, they gave up
that game felt like it was
they gave
closer
up some
than it really
yards and points,
was.
but the game was in hand.
I just don't know how I like the way this game's setting up, based on the way they played last week with their backs against the wall. I mean, because their backs are still against the wall. This is a chance where you say, all right, if we win our division games from here on out, it can start here this weekend, and that can be our meal ticket into the playoffs. But then to that perspective, as Rob kind of alluded to, or even if what's worse, this team missing the playoffs altogether and just saying okay, this year's a mulligan, injuries, personnel, blah blah blah. We still got a franchise quarterback, and we'll be back at it next year. What's worse, missing the playoffs altogether and just kind of letting that be that, or making the playoffs and then possibly getting blown out at some point, or just not being good enough to win any matchup?
Yeah, I don't really know if you can look at either one as better or worse. It's you're coming off a championship. That's the hardest thing to account for.
Absolutely.
And Carlos said,
especially in this league.
Yeah, and Carlos said what a good spot it was for Philly this past week, except for the fact that it was at the Superdome, which is never a good thing for anybody. But when you take a team coming off a championship, especially one that won one in the fashion that Philadelphia did, that throws a wrinkle into everything.
Yeah.
How do people respond and whatnot? So the question of, is it better to make the playoffs and be one and done, or just crap out and go 5-11, basically comes down to, well, would you rather have a higher draft pick, or would you rather have 1 or 2 more Sundays watching the Eagles play this year? That's a personal preference. I don't think it really matters from the standpoint of writing the epitaph, so to speak, on this season. It's barring miracles that go beyond even what happened last year, It's going to be a disappointment.
Yeah, that's the thing. Last year was so in so many ways weird. Like the way things happen for them. And look, you could take any league champion in any sport and kind of really dissect ways that, wow, that's not supposed to happen. That's not supposed to happen. Or that's not supposed to happen. And mix it in with actual teams rising to the occasion and winning games. But all that kind of stuff, it definitely adds to confusion, intrigue, just complexity of what's going on right now and how they've fallen off. And we don't got to spend a whole lot of time on this, but just quickly want to ask, because it's part of the conversation going on in Philadelphia right now, and so I'll ask it this way: has anyone's opinion of Carson Wentz in any way, shape, or form changed?
No.
No, Sunday was obviously the worst game he's ever had as a pro, but I don't think it's a long-term trend at all. No.
I'll just say the thing I've always said, which is the dynamics of this city and sports fans in general. He's how is he ever going to live up to what Foles did for 4 weeks last year? That's the only thing I worry about. And to me, he doesn't seem like someone who would get caught up in that. I don't think he spends his days and nights contemplating his own personal competition with Nick Foles. But look, we've all lived here either our whole lives or a significant portion of our lives. And I said it to you guys Sunday night, I'm not turning on WIP because I don't want to hear put in Foles. And I didn't need to turn on WIP. People would say it to me in text messages, and
it's not surprising. Yeah.
The only reason Nick Foles had the success he did last year in the postseason is because Wentz got hurt after leading them to all the success that set that up.
Right.
Okay.
Not to mention, the career for Nick Foles is you had to get really, really good Nick Foles, really, really bad Nick Foles.
Right.
There's no in between.
Right.
So at that point, he just happened to get hot at the right time. It's basically like Eli Manning come playoff time. He got hot.
Along those same lines, the number of things that had to go right last year. I mean, let's not even try to list them because there's too many and I'll forget a bunch. People talk about luck and the fact that it plays in sports, and they dumb it down like, oh, the Eagles got lucky. Well, that's stupid. But there are a lot of random factors, 50-50 things, everything from how did they respond to injuries to why did Julio Jones slip on that fourth down pass that went the right way. Wait, what's it?
Don't forget about the need ball before halftime.
Don't forget about the fact that Steve Sarkisian is still their offensive coordinator too. At that point,
he's got pictures of somebody.
Don't forget about a field goal that feels like it's still being kicked.
Yeah, I mean, all of these things, right? How close were we at one point to God, I already forgot his name, Sudfeld. People actually thought that might be a good idea in the second quarter of the divisional game. So many things, 50-50 calls that all went one way. You flip a coin, it's going to come up heads 5 times, heads, tails. Heads 5 times, tails 5 times. Last year, every single one came up heads, and that's awesome. And you don't trade it for anything, but then you're going to have years where it comes up tails every time, and this year's about 8 out of 10 so far.
And that's what's so totally unique about this whole thing. Even if the Eagles weren't 4-6 right now, even if they were 6-4 or undefeated, or even if we, put on our, even if we imagined a scenario where they go to the NFC Championship game for 5, 6, 7, 8 years in a row but don't win, even on a totally positive note.
Been there, done that.
I was going to say, it sounds familiar.
Even on, that's why I tried to go as high as 8. Not 6, not 7. Even in a circumstance where the team was still winning a lot of games, what happened last year was so unique that the only way for Carson Wentz to even mimic it is to win a Super Bowl. To better it would have to win too, right? So even though that they're struggling this year, and that he's not even necessarily struggling on the season, a lot of the metrics were in his favor as far as the numbers being better up until at least last week. That's what makes the whole thing really totally a unique situation from the quarterback standpoint, is that they could be undefeated right now, and he would still have the fact that the quote-unquote backup quarterback came in ran through the playoffs and won a Super Bowl, somewhat sort of hanging over his head. Even if he didn't want to intentionally do it, even if the fans didn't want to intentionally do it, we all know it's there because it's just such a unique situation.
The crappy part about it, and this is the last thing I'll say about Fultz because I'm becoming part of the problem now, is if you look at those 3 playoff games, he survived the Atlanta game. You know, he was not anything special. He was remarkably efficient in the Minnesota game, and then he blew the lid off the world in the Super Bowl. So he had a game he survived, a game where he was good enough to win, and a game where he was spectacular. My expectation for Wentz would be a 10, 12-year career of consistently above average to elite play. Does that outweigh the effects of one game? Of course it does, unless it's the only Super Bowl you've ever seen in 60 years. And that, whether that hangs over his head or not, is kind of up to him, but it's kind of up to us and 5 million other people in this area too, I guess, a little bit.
All right, we're going to go to a quick break. We'll be back with Games Not to Bet. A very, very brief paying attention to Survivor. I got a bit of a tale for you guys as far as that goes from last week. And then before we progress on from football, we got to talk about this Monday night game that happened. That was happening about 24 hours ago. And then Mike, I think you in particular, if I picked up on a certain vibe earlier from today, was the shootout not totally something that you enjoyed as a foreshadowing?
I will say it was a fun game to watch, but I'm a little sad. I'm saddened by it because I like defense, and we'll never see an 85 Bears. We'll never see a 2000 Ravens ever again. All
right, so we'll let you dissect that a little bit and kind of just give us a little bit of extension of what you texted out to the group earlier today, because I want to hear your thoughts on that. Jabronis, live from Nippers. We will be back soon.
Can't get enough of the Philly Sports Jabronis? Want to get together over tea and scones and share with us your life story? No thanks. We hate tea and scones. But we do have a website you can visit that offers all the jabroni action you can handle. Go to www.phillysportsjabronis. That's JABRONIS.com. Yahoo! The Philly Sports Jabronis are everywhere. We're online. We're streaming through the internet airwaves.
Can you hear me?
We're probably hiding in your bushes.
Hey, get out of there.
Oh, and we have social media pages. Find us on Facebook and on Twitter at Philly Sports Jabs. And for God's sakes, trim your bushes. It's like Jumanji in here. Who are your top 5 Philly outfielders of all time? What's your pick for the top 5 all-time Philadelphia sports jerseys? Who are the top 5 Philly athletes you'd never let babysit your kids? Let us know by visiting My Top 5 at phillysportsjabronis.com and let us know. Again, that's My Top 5, and the website is phillysportsjabronis.com.
We are back. Philly Sports Jabronis, live from Nippers on this quote-unquote football Thursday, Tuesday evening of Thanksgiving week. Happy Thanksgiving, everybody. The leaves, they're changing colors and all that other stuff. It's good. All right, so we're going to get into Games Not to Bet, and I'm going to pull in a quick Survivor tale from last week. So Jamie and I went down the schedule, and we acknowledged, pretty quickly early on that with 6 teams on bye at this point in the season, whether you were in a buyback or not, it made for a very difficult week. Jamie was locked and loaded in with Atlanta, which I would have just as easily been locked and loaded into, in my opinion, except I had already used them. So as we sat here last week, I basically had tiered my teams out to Indianapolis and I thought Pittsburgh, right? So that's kind of who I was looking at. I was really going to jump on Indianapolis. Didn't realize that I had already taken them. Carlos, do you think my tier was
all right?
good?
So here's the thing with the tiers. Well, I can't sit there and say anything about the tiers at this point because it's a crapshoot. But you
true.
You mentioned,
and plus they both won.
You mentioned 3 things. So you mentioned Atlanta, who, if you like to do some things for entertainment, would have been considered a really, really good bet last week. I'm sorry, good entertainment endeavor last week. because they tend to do well at home against divisional opponents or conference opponents.
Right.
So that normally that's a good play. Jacksonville, for some reason, owns Pittsburgh. Normally has owned Pittsburgh for like the last couple of years, and if not, they play them tough every single time.
It's part of the reason I like
for Survivor Pool, but another entertainment purpose type thing. And then the final one will be the Colts. Andrew Luck owns the Titans, and that came to fruition. So,
right. What happened was, I didn't realize I had taken the Colts.
Okay.
They were my pick. I was texting my pick this one league that I was left in. I was texting my pick, and that's how the picks were submitted. And so I was going through my texts and saw that I had already taken the Colts a couple weeks ago. So I was going to take Pittsburgh, and then and part of the reason, like you're saying, like Jacksonville owning them last year with that win in the playoffs, I was like, all right, this is revenge for Pittsburgh.
Well, that's going to be my nice little bow that didn't wrap it up in the time. I was going to sit there and say, so Indy would have made sense for me, believe it or not. Atlanta definitely would have made sense for me. The only one I wouldn't have touched would have been that Pittsburgh game, just because Pittsburgh, if you look at it, Pittsburgh should have won the game, and they did.
Right.
But Jacksonville plays them tough. Jacksonville makes it not easy for them every single time.
And that, in and of it, what you just said, basically summed up how rough of a Sunday it was for me, because I did not end up taking it. Even though I liked the only thing I liked about the game was that it was revenge from last year's playoffs, and I was like, you know what? They're traveling to this game. Jacksonville hasn't won in forever. They're coming off that big ass. Pittsburgh was coming off the stomping of Carolina. I was like, this is a clunker, and sure enough, it was. Except for that fact, and it was a clunker. Even though they won, and had I taken them, I would have advanced. It was still a clunker. I wasn't wrong about it being a clunker, but they ended up winning. I didn't take them. I had already taken the Colts. I had already taken the Saints. I considered Houston for a hot second.
Can't trust them.
Didn't take them. I ended up taking Minnesota, not being comfortable with the pick. Minnesota they were coming off a bye. They were getting Cook back. They were getting Diggs back. And they were going into Chicago, as we all know, and they put up a pretty good effort. Wasn't comfortable, but that just goes to show how difficult Survivor can be.
Kirk Cousins in primetime games, huh?
Yeah.
That's about you said,
I didn't. Well, what was other than Houston? Like, again, if I would have taken Pittsburgh,
I didn't know what the rest. I don't know what the rest of your teams look like.
There really weren't many teams left to pick from. They're taking Dallas or the Redskins.
Okay, so I would have definitely taken Pittsburgh before I would have taken Minnesota.
I said I was ready to do it, and again, that's like the most befuddling thing is that I wasn't wrong, but they, that it was a clunker of a game. And everything except for the last 10 seconds had me thinking I made the right choice.
When Jacksonville is right, that's exactly what they do. They make it a clunker of a game. They muck it up. That's exactly what they do.
But it wasn't even about just Jacksonville. I mean, it just set up as a game where Ben Roethlisberger throws his 50% of his interceptions in one game on the season. I mean,
Roethlisberger's terrible on the road.
Yeah,
that's and Pittsburgh had throttled Carolina on Thursday Night Football a week and a half ago. You come off a 30-point plus win in this league. That's one thing they look at. You're a fave the next week. But I would think Minnesota would go against a number of your survival principles.
It did.
And I don't know how closely you can follow them at week 11
right.
in the season now.
No, but it went against division. It went against
prime time.
On the road in prime time. On the road in prime time. Well, on the road on the weekend prime time. Those games are playable. Really, what I should and the one it's not even the Pittsburgh. The lack of picking Pittsburgh that I would say was the failure. I had used the Chiefs, but I hadn't used the Rams.
I'm mad at you.
So I could have taken the Rams at home on Monday night.
You even asked me.
But
I thought we were cool, man.
Well, look. You want to pick against the Chiefs or you want to pick against the Bears?
I wasn't going to sit there and pick against either one. I would have told you to pick Pittsburgh.
Like I said, I was very close to doing it. Wasn't wrong. If Pittsburgh would have sat here and sat, won 35-10, I would have said I made a horrible decision. Minnesota had more reason to win their game than Pittsburgh did. You know what I mean? Like,
Minnesota has Kirk Cousins. He doesn't
No,
win
I
games
know.
in prime time.
I was not comfortable with it at all. I had to sweat it out for 10 hours.
The only reason why I'm not going to even sit there and take Green Bay next week is because Aaron Rodgers, Green Bay doesn't win road games, so that kind of makes it like a wash.
And that's a good segue to the few teams that we would advise for this coming week, and then we'll have Rob give his game or games, not the bet. I mean, the Lions host the Bears on Thanksgiving. The Lions are always intriguing hosting on Thanksgiving. That
you smell that?
I actually, yeah.
You smell that?
Yeah, it's up there. I actually like the Lions for it, but in a survivor pool, yikes. I mean, have the Detroit Lions ever been picked in the history of a survivor pool by anyone?
the better Thursday team to pick right now seems like them boys.
Well, that's
Hosting the
actually.
Redskins.
I'll get to that game in a minute, but
I would actually say the Saints, but I'm
yeah.
crazy.
Do you have the Saints left at this point in the year? I don't know.
They're hosting the Falcons.
But that's a divisional game on a weird day after another just shattering performance by New Orleans, a 40-point win. You would expect them to come back to earth a little bit. That line is super inflated at 13.
We were saying this about a similar style, well, not similar style, but a team last year was doing similar things. Mm-hmm. And they just kept blowing people's backs out. There you go. I got it in for you.
There it is.
They kept blowing people's backs out the whole entire season. It just may be at this point where the Saints are just running roughshod.
So,
Talk about the Eagles.
if you have a team in the midst of a season like that, when I think about survivor pools, I think, okay, how the hell are you still alive if you haven't used New Orleans by now? The surest thing, week in, week out. I mean, along those lines, New England coming off a bye against the dead man walking Jets.
Yeah, they're on the road, but that smells like a good pick if you've got them. Mm-hmm. Eagles at home against the Giants. I'm sure that's going to be a popular pick.
Can't
People
trust
who
it.
are still it's hard to find anybody to trust at this point. Just real quickly, Bengals are home against the Browns.
Can't
I don't
trust
know
it.
if I would. But just looking for some semblance. The Broncos are hosting the Steelers. The
Hell no.
Steelers had tried to have now they're going to play their second game on the road in a row.
Colts should
I
be
was
pretty.
just looking
Colts at home against the Dolphins. That feels like a good one. Texans at home against Tennessee on Monday night.
No.
Mariota plays.
If Mariota doesn't play, that could make things interesting. Texans, they have a bubble of their own that could burst at any time. Vikings at home against the Packers. Now, Carlos, you were saying, obviously you're not going to trust the Packers this week. Does that mean?
Well, I don't trust the Vikings either.
You can't
Cousins
trust
doesn't
either
win
side of that
primetime
game.
games. Normally you at this point, when you sit there and look at a line and you say Aaron Rodgers is a 3-point dog, your eyes bug out. But the Packers don't win games on the road this season. They have yet to win one. And Kirk Cousins is just a horrible quarterback in primetime period. Flip a coin?
Rodgers isn't a 3-point dog to Cousins. Green Bay is a 3-point dog to Minnesota. That's how I try to.
Fair.
That's how I try to think about it. Mike
Fair.
McCarthy's part of that. And
Mike McCarthy.
The inconsistency of that defense is a part of that, and so on and so forth.
Oh, every single coach in the NFL is laying at least 5 to Mike McCarthy. At least.
Todd Bowles says hi, but yeah, I get your point.
Panthers play host to the Seahawks. Ravens hosting your buddy Matt McGloin. Is he still a Raider?
No. Baltimore is probably your best bet.
Is Todd Maranovich gonna come out of the stands?
Hey, at least
Any thoughts on Jackson's performance? I know he was a big debate topic for us.
I didn't see it. I know he ran for a buck and some change.
He basically played like he did in college. Yeah.
That's not going to last long.
I know.
I understand what the other guy said. Marvin Lewis said that too.
Thought about the Ravens for a hot second last week, except that you had someone making their first career start. So
Who are they playing?
I know they're playing Cincinnati. They were playing Cincinnati.
Yeah.
This is why people
Without
eventually
AJ
lose
Green.
and survive. Yeah, I know, without AJ Green
At home.
I was
Where the record is ridiculous and off of bye, he's ridiculous.
Like I said, the only thing that talked me out of that was a guy making his first NFL start.
You definitely should have spoken to me last week. I'm just saying.
With Harbaugh rumored to be on his way out in Baltimore, I'm really interested to see what becomes of Jackson's career there.
Yeah.
He's just a really intriguing player to me.
Well, what we learned is a right coach makes the quarterback. Goff looked like he was a bust year one, whatever, and then McVay gets there, and all of a sudden he looks like a world beater.
It's so hard to remember when Harbaugh wasn't in Baltimore because he's been there, what's he, third longest tenured coach right now?
Yeah.
And so I don't know which direction they will go if he does indeed leave, but you would have to hope they will look in the direction of somebody who's going to get the most out of Lamar Jackson, because that's a pretty special talent. But Monday night game, I'm dying to talk about that game last night.
Yeah. So,
yeah.
Yeah. Let's get into Mike's obsession with, I guess lack of obsession with the offensive performance that went on last night. That's probably a little too harsh. But just give us what you're thinking.
Hey, look, I enjoyed the hell out of that game. I was on the edge of my seat. I had Mahomes going in my fantasy league, so I wanted points.
Right.
But I'm just watching it, and look, I'm not going to say there was no defense. Aaron Donald was a monster. Chris Jones had a nice game for the Chiefs. So there was some defense, but just to go up and down the field with, like, no stops. There's flags on every other play.
Especially on the KC side, yeah. There were a lot of flags in that game.
And everyone's running the RPOs these days. Look, I know you guys are into college football. I've never been a college football fan because they score 60, 70 points every week, and now the NFL has turned into college football.
Or lacrosse. For
Hey, now.
night, it was lacrosse.
Can we insult one of my favorite sports at a time here?
Sorry, I meant field hockey.
So that's where I was going with that. I actually enjoy defensive battles, and there's been some great Super Bowls that have been defensive battles, and I mean I know this mandate has been coming down the pike for a long time, and Goodell's finally got his dream. We don't need to draft any defensive players anymore.
I'm on board with you. Styles make fights, and if everyone's going to sit there and go the same style and just have it attract me, it's going to be good for the people that sit there and tune in for a Super Bowl or tune in if their favorite team looks like they might actually win something. But ultimately, I want that defensive team that sits there and smothers somebody once in a blue moon.
Right.
They're fun to watch. The game might be boring to people that don't like football the way I like football.
Right.
I consider myself a little bit of a purist when it comes to that. So, I mean, you come across the 2000 Ravens, you come across the 85 Bears. It's good for the game. It might not be good for TV. It might not be good for gathering these new age fans, but it's good for the game. I don't want to see everyone doing the same thing, because at that point, I don't know, pick whatever flag football league you want to go to, and that's where we're going.
The thing that's always been attractive about college football to me is there's 101 ways to win a college football game. You can do what Oklahoma does and try to light it up for 70 points a week. You can do what Army does and run the ball every single solitary play, try to hold possession for 45 minutes and outlast somebody 17-16. You can do what the old Nebraska Cornhuskers teams used to do and go 10 yards a carry, 10 yards a carry, hit somebody for play action 3 times a game and score a touchdown in every one. The NFL has, as he just said, gone in a different direction, and it's not styles make fights anymore. It's pinball on grass, and it's fun to watch to a point. But what I wonder is how much of it was a business decision on their part. 3 or 4 years ago, when that I'm going to get the names wrong, but that T.J. Yates versus Joe Webb or whoever it was football game.
That would have been Houston versus
it was
Minnesota.
I must be wrong then. It was a wild card game.
Okay, so it had to have been Yates versus it had to be Kansas City at that point, right? Or
was it?
Did it involve the Houston Texans?
Is that the Kansas City or
T.J.
Cincinnati?
Yates is definitely one of them.
Okay.
So it's like T.J. Yates versus McCarron, was it? I don't remember the names, but you basically had 2 guys who did not start the season as starting quarterbacks.
But wasn't it McGloin?
It might have been.
I think it was McGloin.
Maybe it was.
It was the wild card game between
McGloin
Houston
and
and
Yates?
Oakland.
Oh yeah.
Okay, so
Connor Cook played that game. McGloin didn't start that game.
Oh, he didn't start the game?
Nope, Connor Cook played that game.
So Connor Cook and
Cook and
T.J. Yates. Okay, there you go. So, it's I always think back to the old NBA on NBC commercials where they'd pick a superstar, they'd pick a team, they'd say, Jordan, Barkley's, Bulls, Suns, it's Sunday on NBC, and you make a joke like, Cook, Yates, Raiders, Texans, tune in on ESPN, So did the NFL see that game, or maybe a dozen others like it, and make a business decision? Look, we can't have third-string quarterbacks battling to 12-9, mud fights on national TV anymore. Everything is going to be redirected to protect these guys. I don't care if your name is Aaron Rodgers or Tom Brady, or if your name is Kirk Cousins, or if your name is Josh Rosen.
Sage Rosenfels.
I was going to say, don't say Cam Newton.
You are going to be protected as a quarterback in this league. We see that in the Coles every week. We see that in the receivers running wide open all over the middle with defensive backs kind of, like a teenage boy on his first date getting a little closer. And we see it in college football too, in the draft stocks. Baker Mayfield would not have been the number one draft pick in the NFL in 1992 if he was the only kid coming out that year, okay? Teams in college used to draft guys like Troy Aikman, number one as a quarterback. A guy who went to UCLA, a team that had a phenomenal defense, handed off 40, 45 times a game, and completed 17 of his 22 passes.
Right.
Very white.
And above all, there it is. Yes.
Very white.
Baker's got a little bit of white chocolate on the field in him, and so college football kind of creates this whole thing where quarterbacks are doing different things now. You look at, I'm going to pick Michigan because it's kind of near and dear to my heart, but not too many teams are playing football that way anymore at the college level. That's part of their success this year, I think. You've got more quarterbacks who come out of that. I'm going to say Cardale Jones is one who did not succeed at the NFL mold, but you got to think about the profile of a guy like Baker. 10 years before that, a guy like Sam Bradford, who got drafted number one overall because he had, Pac-Man level point numbers put up over 13 games in a watered down Big 12. 10 years before that, it was Peyton Manning getting drafted number one overall. 10 years before that, it was Aikman. You see how these quarterback profiles are changing? And quarterbacks are always going to be centerpieces, What's it going to look like 10 years from now? Is it going to be some kid with a Denard Robinson skill set? Is it going to be something totally different? Or do you go back the other way? A guy like Phil Simms wouldn't last a season in the NFL anymore. And he won a Super Bowl and kind of won another one.
Part of that is some of those quarterbacks breaking the mold, though. So you get a Baker Mayfield these days because you have a Drew Brees from back in the days. A guy that's undersized that can sit there and sling the rock.
And if you look at Brees, he was the first one. That basketball on grass thing that Purdue ran. That was, you remember the stupid hick in Varsity Blues looking at the wide receiver going, that's what I think. That stuff was unheard of. Now
actually,
you see five wide
that season,
you
can sit and say two people because Brees got traded. Well, not traded, but Brees was part of. Actually, it wasn't a trade. So San Diego traded to Atlanta
for the Vic.
And got McVay and Tomlinson. So those are the two basketball and grass right there, but for different reasons.
And Vic, as much as partly became a punchline later in his career, how many guys did he pave the way for? You don't see Cam Newton if you never saw Mike Vick. You don't see Baker Mayfield if you never saw Drew Brees. But evolution being what it is, Cam Newton's 6'6", 250. Mike Vick is not.
Right. But, he still pays the way for Deshaun Watson. He pays the way for Patrick Mahomes. He pays the way for all those. Where I'm going with this.
Kind of, but I think it goes even beyond that, okay, in that Lamar. Okay, Lamar Jackson, he's the one who's the next intriguing one to me. He pretty much won the Heisman Trophy as an athlete who could throw a little. And then still got drafted in the first round. I thought he was Denard with 3 extra inches. Then I watched Louisville and I was like, no. This kid knows how to read a defense. He can do things Denard could never do. And sure enough, he did get taken in the first round. Now, I'm really interested to see how his career turns out because if it does, what you're going to see colleges start doing is taking these, and yes, we all know what this is slang for, athletic quarterbacks from the high school ranks and keeping them at quarterback rather than switching them to safety or receiver and wide receiver and saying, look, we want you to go out there and do what you do. We'll teach you how to play quarterback as we go. That's why we have you here for 5 years.
Rob, it goes even further back than that at this point, because these days you have kids coming out of high school. There's some kids that aren't listed at position. They're just called athletes.
That was Robinson. That was probably
No,
Lamar.
I'm that serious. They literally sit there listening to athlete.
Yeah. And I think Denard was the first guy to be drafted as such. They said, Jacksonville selects Denard Robinson, offensive player from the University of Michigan. Nobody thought he was going to play quarterback. He's shorter than I am. I mean, so nobody thought that was possible then. And as time goes along, the NFL is going to fit the mold of the quarterbacks who are coming out. If it goes back to the Aikmans, 6'4", whiter than skim milk, and immobile as a rocking chair, then yeah, that's the way the NFL is going to go. But if you keep getting Lamar Jackson's, Baker Mayfield's, athletes who become quarterbacks coming out, what do? They spread the field and they make one-on-one decisions rather than reading all 11 guys. RPO is part of this too.
Right.
It's a huge discussion where college is ahead of the pros in terms of innovations. And I think that just manifests itself in what you saw last night. Mahomes was in a offense in college with Texas Tech, whose goal was to score 55 points and hope like hell the other guys didn't score 60.
And it's funny the way you say, because there's innovation, but then at the same time, the NFL in particular is a copycat league. So it's like every time there's innovation, then 29 other teams, try to do the same thing. And so you have innovation, but then you get copycat, and there's evolution, but at the same time, there's also things are cyclical. Like it was only 2-3 years ago that we were hearing things like. Why draft a running back number one in the first round? Running back, you don't need to.
No, people still say
that. Still say that.
Yeah, people still say
and
that.
I feel like people are saying it less. Maybe not. Maybe
Unless
I'm
it's
ignoring
Saquon.
it. But
I got two things.
But so it's evolution. It's and things are cyclical. All it takes is one team to, hit on the jackpot like Saquon or Ezekiel Elliott or whoever you want to list that's been paid off dividends from the running back position, and you hear it at least less. Not that you don't hear it at all.
All right, so two things. You talk about copycat leagues. There's a couple things just where you really can't copycat. And as a Raiders fan, I hate to say it, but you good luck copycatting Patrick Mahomes. Those don't fall out of trees. I don't know what his career arc is going to be, but
when I say copycat,
like
I don't necessarily mean copycat humans. I mean copycat scheme.
All right.
So I mean, it's a good distinction to make. I see where.
Then I can shut up on that point. Now, going back to Saquon, the fun part about Saquon, and this is the reason why you still don't sit there and think about running backs in this way. For all the Giants fans that are going to sit there and say, or even if they get Justin Herbert this year, okay, cool, we got Justin Herbert. Most of the Giants fans are GMs. They don't realize that come year 4 of Justin Herbert's contract, you have to sit there and figure out whether or not you want to pay Saquon. You're going to pay him $100 million or whatever he's worth at that point, and you're going to still sit there and have OBJ on the roster and you pay him, and then you got to come back next year and hopefully pay the guy that you picked as your first over pick or whatever pick he is as a quarterback, and think you're going to make a team.
Not necessarily. I mean, I don't think they're keeping that band together.
The point being, that's the reason why the whole running back situation, the whole running back thing is you don't. I mean, in theory, you don't draft them high, but you definitely don't pay him late. You gotta let them go.
Well, I mean, they're short. Historically, they're short. Their careers are shorter, so there's that. So that's the thing. Like, to some extent, just focusing on the running back thing in particular, I find it a little strange to not want to invest a high draft pick in someone who's expected to be. You're not even let's leave expectations out. Someone coming out of the draft as a friggin' great running back, I would think you'd want to get those early years more than you'd want to say not that you're going to sit there and say, oh, I'm going to get running backs falling out of the tree 4 or 5 years out of the into their NFL career.
But they kind of
that's a luxury though. That's what I'm sitting there trying to say. I mean, if you're in a position where you can sit there and draft a running back, that's a luxury. Like the Patriots had to draft Sonny Michel this year. I think he was making the first round. But they draft him. But they're in a position to do so because the rest of the team is pretty much
right. It all comes down to individual
set. Now to sit there and be up at number 2 and have what will start, and at this point, Giants may have actually picked that one right, but will start as a solid set of quarterbacks to sit there and select from this past season. Instead of saying, nah, we're going to take the running back and then sit there and watch your quarterback suck out loud weekly, and then.
But they're in a real interesting / confusing position too, because you're talking about this quarterback as someone who's won 2 Super Bowls. You know what I mean?
He's got to go. Joe Montana. I know. Joe Montana won 4, and he was a Chief.
Right. Exactly. True. There's no debate in that. But again, when you're sitting there and you're looking at the fact, you kind of went down the laundry list already. But to me, at some point, there's reason to think that you can just give it a go one more year, and then quarterbacks come out of here. They're going to get a chance to get a quarterback this year again, right? The class is not the same.
Coming into the season, did we think they would have a chance to draft a quarterback? Did we think they would suck this bad?
No.
It's the second straight year we've said that.
Right. Yeah. Which may say something for our prognostication skills. But the point being, they were in position to sit there and draft one, and I felt they should have. Now, again, I look like a dummy now because Saquon is doing what Saquon is doing. But the long story short for that is, at some point, you still got to pay these people. He's not. You can't keep him around for the second part of this whole thing, and keep Beckham around, and perhaps have to sit there and be on the cusp of paying the quarterback that you drafted the next year.
And that's where Saquon, maybe not him in particular so much, but the running back position falls off the wagon. Who's been more productive over the first 5 years of a career than Le'Veon Bell? And now he's become an afterthought.
I know.
Right? If you look at the way teams draft and the way they build their franchises are 2 different things. And what I mean by that is, if you're starting from scratch with the salary cap, who are you paying first? The quarterback, right? Without quarterback, there's no game.
Right, if you got your quarterback right.
And then, who are you paying second?
You got to knock down the quarterback.
The guy who chases the quarterback, right? The defensive end. Then, you've got a choice between, am I paying the guy who protects the quarterback or the guy the quarterback targets? Or if you go the other direction, am I paying the guy who covers the guys the quarterback targets? And so on and so forth. And you get really far down that list before you get to running backs and linebackers. In free agency, they are the 2 least valued positions on the field. In the draft, that's kind of a different question. A lot of people think of it the same way, which is, I can get a good running back in the 5th round, why am I going to spend a top 5 pick? But in the last 3 years, Fournette, Ezekiel, and Saquon, all top 10 picks as running backs. So you're seeing a shift in theory a little bit there.
Yeah.
I think where Joe was going was, I think the Giants thought they could squeeze another year out of Eli. They didn't like the quarterbacks. The quarterbacks that got drafted weren't that great. I mean, they were going to get Mayfield, Josh Allen, and Rosen, and who's the other one I'm missing? Darnold aren't exactly lighting the world on fire.
Right.
They got free agents. They thought they had fixed their line problems. And they have some good skill positions. They thought they could make one more run at it. Why not take the best, arguably the best player on the board?
Right, exactly. That's what I was thinking. Okay, so we're going to take another real quick break, and we'll be back. We are definitely going to squeeze in the game or games not to bet, and then we'll take it from there. Jabronis, live at Nippers, hang with us.
Can't get enough of the Philly Sports Jabronis? Want to get together over tea and scones and share with us your life story? No thanks. We hate tea and scones. But we do have a website you can visit that offers all the jabroni action you can handle. Go to www.phillysportsjabronis. That's JABRONIS.com. Yahoo! The Philly Sports Jabronis are everywhere. We're online. We're streaming through the internet airwaves.
Can you hear me?
We're probably hiding in your bushes.
Hey, get out of there.
Oh, and we have social media pages. Find us on Facebook and on Twitter at Philly Sports Jams. And for God's sakes, trim your bushes. It's like Jumanji in here. Who are your top 5 Philly outfielders of all time? What's your pick for the top 5 all-time Philadelphia sports jerseys? Who are the top 5 Philly athletes you'd never let babysit your kids? Let us know by visiting My Top 5 at phillysportsjabronis.com and let us know. Again, that's My Top 5, and the website is phillysportsjabronis.com.
Philly Sports Jabronis, we are back.
So, looking at some games not to bet for this week. It's early in the week. As we said, we're recording on Tuesday night, but we got games on Thursday this week, and it's anti-American not to bet football on Thanksgiving. However, if I want to tell you the one I'd be worried about, it's Dallas and Washington. I don't think Dallas really has any business giving anybody 8 points right now.
Okay.
But Washington's got a backup quarterback, Colt McCoy, a guy you could game plan around 10 years ago, which is the last time I remember anything about him at the University of Texas.
That's not a drop-off.
So that's the one I'm staying away from right now. You sound like you might be on the Redskins side, and I could see that a whole lot better than I can Dallas giving 8.5 or 8 points to anybody. Looking forward to Sunday. I see a lot of candidates, and I assume that I'm going to check back in later in the week with my games not to bet officially, but I'll give you the 2 that I'm definitely looking at right now. Make that 3. Jacksonville, Buffalo, because you don't want to watch it anyway. Seattle going to Carolina and only getting 3.5 is weird. And the Chargers giving 12 in a non-conference game to the Cardinals is also something I don't really want to play with. So those are some candidates for Sunday, but for right now, if you want a game not to bet for Thursday, it's Washington and Dallas. But again, reminder, it's anti-American not to bet football on Thanksgiving.
God bless America.
Well said, well said. All right, so we're gonna wrap up this hour here for purposes of our recording on Wildfire. So, but we're gonna keep the party going a little bit. So, if you're listening to this on Friday afternoon on Wildfire and you want to catch the rest of the recording, you can find us again at The Grueling Truth. You can find us on iHeartRadio. You can also find us on iTunes. You can also find us at phillysportsjabronis.com. Want to thank everyone at Nippers once again for hosting us here and sponsoring us. Want to wish everyone a happy Thanksgiving, and God damn it, want to wish the Birds a get a win on Sunday.
Yeah, gobble gobble.
Jabroni sort of signing off. We're gonna cut to a commercial break here so the guys at Wildfire can wrap up the recording, and then and we'll be back at it with some chatter about Roy Halladay's chances for the MLB Hall of Fame, as well as other folks who were on the first time ballot in 2019, and maybe if we're really feeling up to it, talk about the recent chapter of the Markelle Fultz
Saga.
We're just going to ignore Jimmy Butler.
Well, we'll talk. Let's talk about him instead. Jabronis, we'll talk to you next week again. Find us on all those various outlets if you are hearing this on Wildfire Radio and about to get cut off.
Can't get enough of the Philly Sports Jabronis? Want to get together over tea and scones and share with us your life story? No thanks. We hate tea and scones. But we do have a website you can visit that offers all the jabroni action you can handle. Go to www.phillysportsjabronis. That's JABRONIS.com. Yahoo! The Philly Sports Jabronis are everywhere. We're online. We're streaming through the internet airwaves.
Can you hear me?
We're probably hiding in your bushes.
Hey, get out of there.
Oh, and we have social media pages. Find us on Facebook and on Twitter at Philly Sports Jams. And for God's sakes, trim your bushes. It's like Jumanji in here. Who are your top 5 Philly outfielders of all time? What's your pick for the top 5 all-time Philadelphia sports jerseys? Who are the top 5 Philly athletes you'd never let babysit your kids? Let us know by visiting My Top 5 at phillysportsjabronis.com and let us know. Again, that's My Top 5, and the website is phillysportsjabronis.com.
Jabronis, we are back. Okay, so to get into the extracurricular activity of sorts, we're going to talk about Roy Halladay's chances. Let's start with Roy Halladay's chances for induction into the Hall of Fame. And yes, there's a distinction to make. It's not just about induction into the Hall of Fame. It's, the conversation is he a first ballot guy? And we'll see how we feel here sitting at the table. I think when you look at his numbers, you look at what do we got? What do we got here? We got the numbers. We got the eye test, right? Is that usually what it comes down to? We got not just the numbers in the eye test. I'm sorry. There's also the generational impact, right? Numbers, eye test. What did they do during their time? Where did their numbers? Where did their eye test fit into their actual time amongst their peers? The first number I think that people are going to. Not that I think that, it's not starting a revolution here. People talk about his number of wins, okay? And people talk about the number of wins in general for starting pitchers. It's never been any more true than in present day when judging starting pitchers by wins has become totally inappropriate, right? It just, as games, we talked about the evolution of the NFL in a different, different context earlier. Evolution of baseball. Starting pitchers today shouldn't be really judged by the number of wins as a hallmark, I think. I mean, it's part of the equation, but it shouldn't be the hallmark, I don't think. And it's funny how, if you look at it from a historical perspective, even back in the day, it was almost like you shouldn't have judged starting pitchers by their number of wins, because for a different reason. They were getting more of them, where maybe they didn't quite necessarily deserve it. Whereas today, it's kind of the opposite. They're getting less of them, and even those who are among the elite, a lot of times they're getting less of them, not just because they're being pulled from games, or they're pitching fewer innings for all different reasons that go into why that is the case. But you definitely, in my opinion, cannot judge a starting pitcher by wins first and foremost. And this kind of just occurred to me today, honestly. I read a lot of articles about the prognosticating of when people will get into the Hall of Fame and why, and it may take this many years, and everything from the percentages to this is how their votes have increased or decreased. I consume a lot of this stuff. And if you would have asked me a couple years ago, 2 years ago, it has nothing to do with his unfortunate death. If you would have asked me a year or two ago, would Roy Halladay be a first ballot Hall of Famer? I may have been inclined to say, I don't think so. But something occurred to me today as I was going through his numbers, and he's got a ton of things that work in his favor. Mainly being the generational, like his numbers from what his generation accomplished are really, really strong. His career landscape, he's got just over 200 wins, right? Quote unquote, as Tom, to steal a quote unquote from Tom Verducci today, he's just got just over 200 wins, right? But the thing that occurred to me today is we're never going to see someone win 300 games, or at least probably not in our lifetime. Things can be cyclical, and things maybe baseball will change again. So we're never going to see, or at least I'm going to try to say that again a third time. We're not likely to see anyone who's going to win 300 games. So
here's the thing,
so that doesn't matter.
No, it actually kind of does, because he's part of the generation where you still sit there and eat up innings, and you still sit there and dominate, you still sit there and get those wins. He's not part of the starting the reliever era, or the save the pitcher's arm. He's not part of that at all. He was never part of that.
He completed a ton of games. Like, he was like the prototypical guy who would complete games. Like, the metrics on like the number of he completed like one out of every 5
So
starts.
at that point I feel like the baselines apply for him. I don't know exactly what they are for pitchers, but I feel like you got to throw him in that category, and apparently my cohort over here has those numbers.
So this baseballreference.com site is tremendous.
Yeah.
As somebody who loved baseball for like the first 20 years of my life, and then kind of started realizing this whole football thing is way more interesting, and this lacrosse stuff is fun and all that. But this is interesting. They have 5 different measures, and I'll be honest, I don't know what they all mean. It's called Hall of Fame standards, black ink, gray ink. Those 2 I understand. One is intangibles, one is tangibles. Something called JAWS, which I guess is an acronym,
right?
And the Hall of Fame Monitor, which is, I guess, a publication. So out of these 5 standards they use, 2 of them have him solidly, no doubt about it, in the Hall of Fame. 2 of them have him just barely out of it, and the other one has him just barely in the
for
Hall
first
of Fame.
for first ballot or for whole?
In the Hall of Fame. It doesn't say
Okay.
anything about first
Okay.
ballot. So I guess when we come to the first ballot discussion, right, I look at somebody like Clemente, right, who dies tragically while he's still playing, and they waive the 5-year waiting period, and they say we're putting him in the Hall of Fame right now. Well, I guess we can all agree Roberto Clemente was probably more indelible on baseball's history than Roy Halladay.
Well, I mean, he just
Good.
with Clemente, even before you go into what was in Halladay's system at the time of his
I'm not
accident.
worried about any of that.
But he was on a mission, right? Wasn't Clemente coming home
Clemente
from
was
a mission?
he was taking relief supplies. I think Nicaragua had an earthquake, and he was
right. So
delivering
that whole
supplies.
part of
Yeah,
it created a new dynamic.
Like you had to be the biggest asshole of 1973 or whatever that was to vote against Clemente. My personal feeling, looking at this, would be if I average this all out, Halladay is a fringe Hall of Famer.
Just fringe, just in general.
That would be my feeling. Looking at all this, he's Jeff Bagwell. He's
All right, but why
he's
though?
Trevor Hoffman. He's these guys who they're in, and I don't have a problem with it. But if somebody wanted to make a case for them not to be in, I'd listen to them as well. And that's just looking at these numbers.
Any numbers in particular that say why to that?
No, they're just guidelines.
Well, I'm looking at the same. I was looking at the same website, and if you just squarely look at the numbers, you could clearly make that argument. He's got some years that are bad, but I think this is why you cannot just look at the numbers, because remember, he was bouncing around in the minor leagues. He came up, he went back down. I mean, he really only
25
finally
years old.
25 when he finally was a major leaguer, and then by 35 he was done. He was flamed out from injuries. And during those 10 years, for 8 of them probably, he was the most dominant pitcher in baseball. I don't think he's a first ballot now that I'm really looking at these numbers, but he's a Hall of Famer for sure.
So from 02 till 11, he made 8 out of 10 All-Star games. 1 year he was injured, and the other year I guess the writers just fell asleep or something because he finished 5th in the Cy Young. He won a Cy Young in the AL. He won one in the NL.
Right, he's got 2 Cy Youngs.
Clemens has done that, and probably a couple other guys I'm not thinking of. But to win a Cy Young in both leagues is something I would think is pretty remarkable.
2 in a 10-year span. And he's also been in the top 10 voting. You got to look at his top 10 voting.
So 5. Sorry.
Did Pedro do that?
I have to imagine he did. Okay. Yeah. Pedro Clemens, probably a guy like Sutton back in the day. Seaver maybe. Anyway, 5 other times, 3 times in the AL and twice in the NL, he finished top 5 for the Cy Young.
That is actually, to me, that is a bigger positive. And in some, I got to be careful how I say this. Winning 2 Cy Youngs, Rob, like you just said, 1 in each league is incredible. But being ranked in that top tier so many times is, to me, in some respects, it's more evidence of his deserving.
So, I'm trying to think, like, peers-wise. So, the 1 year that he finished 2nd for the Cy Young, Cliff Lee won it. Francisco Rodriguez, K-Rod, was 3rd. Dice K was 4th. Mariano was 5th. Mike Mussina was 6th. So, these are solid guys. I mean, Mike Mussina is another guy like that, where you're like, I think you should be in the Hall of Fame, but maybe I'm missing something.
Mussina definitely should be in the Hall of Fame.
Okay.
I believe.
So, both of his 2 meaningful years with Philadelphia, he won a Cy Young and he finished second the other time. He finished in the top 7 in MVP voting. I'm sorry, top 6 in MVP voting. But here was the part that I found really interesting. I'm just going to read a couple names to you, and you tell me what comes to mind. Justin Verlander, Zach Greinke, Ron Guidry, Doug Drabek. What names? What comes to mind when I say names like that?
Well, Verlander, yes.
Being the Hall.
Verlander's the dominant guy. Guidry, I know from
I
back
see
in
you're
the
going
day, but go ahead.
These are his comparisons,
Right.
right, on this page. This is what this page does. It compares you to other guys who've played the sport over God knows how many years, and those are the closest comparisons to Halladay. So if I look at those 4 names, Verlander, absolutely a Hall of Famer.
He's a Hall of Famer, yep.
Drabek, probably not. Greinke,
Probably not.
Greinke, too early to say.
Right.
And Guidry, I guess it's a bridge too far. I don't remember the guy.
Yeah, but probably not at this point.
So I think based solely on these measurable numbers and the analytic side of what they do now, it's a close call. Based on his accomplishments, his finishes, and the awards, the fact that, my God, this is cool. For 5 straight years, 2007 to 2011, he led Major League Baseball in complete games.
Yep.
And by then, he's in his 30s. I don't think the Hall of Fame is incomplete without him. But I think if you got to the 3rd or 4th year, much like Piazza, without him being inducted, people would be like, okay, it's time.
And that's what I was going to mention was the complete games. Like he went long in games his whole career. In the 21st century, he's number 1. He's got 65 complete games in his career. The next closest is Sabathia with 38.
I know that's like Moon and Moon and the Stars above. And that's the thing. Like for someone who had a relatively short career, he pitched a lot. That's the thing. And I'm taking these statistics from Verducci, Go State. Over a 10-year peak from 02 to 11, Halladay led all pitchers in wins with 170. Winning percentage at 694. Complete games, 63. Nobody else had more than 33. You mentioned Sabathia. Shutouts, 18. And that's, the numbers at that point, he's definitely a case where the generational impact is worth more than the numbers, I think. So even if you say wash out the numbers, but over a 10-year peak, he led all pitchers in wins, and winning percentage, and complete games, and shutouts. To get into the analytics, his FIP to finish this this little bracket here that I have, which is, I believe, fielding percentage.
It's
which is
something about independent of how your fielders play. Like if you have a really great shortstop, your FIP is worse,
right?
Because he's making you look better than you really are.
Basically,
if your shortstop sucks, your FIP goes higher because he's making you look worse than you. I hope I'm getting that right. I'm still a meat head heart. Confused by some of this stuff.
I mean, you have to know the alphabet, like frontwards, backwards, and from the middle, inside out, both ways to understand all these analytics. I mean, people make them up every day. I mean, all you have to do is make up an analytic statistic to be an internet hero anymore. But whatever, he led in that analytical defensive fielding metric, which is listed last here probably because it doesn't mean quite as much. And in those 10 years where he led in all those metrics, again, the wins, the winning percentage, the complete games, and the shutouts, he also, and I'm going to kind of gloss over the 8 All-Star teams to a certain extent because that's a popularity vote, right? It's not a statistical thing.
Yeah, but 8 of them out of 10 years,
Yeah.
you stay popular for a long time, right?
But what I think is more significant is that he finished in the top five in Cy Young voting 7 times.
Yeah.
That's so half the decade more than half the decade, almost a whole decade in the top 5.
I mean, probably the last thing I'll say on it is My two memories of Halladay are, one of them doesn't have much to do with this, but it's kind of interesting about the pitcher he was, and the other one is going to be my final point as to why I feel the way I do. First one is, I remember when he first came to the Phillies as a Mets fan, my thought was, it's over. It's over. Because those were the years when they were banging it out. You know, the Mets won in 06, the Phillies came back in 107, the Phillies won in 08, the Mets and the Phillies, I think, both made the playoffs in 09. They were kind of going blow for blow. You know, we get Jesus, I forgot his name, Johan Santana. They respond with John Lieber. You know, it was like it was always the Mets had the big names, but the Phillies played better as a team. And then they got Halladay, and I was like, it's over. Like, you know, that's it for the Mets. Okay. Let's just say I didn't feel that way when they acquired Kevin Millwood or Joe Bland. So that's one thing for Halladay. But the thing that really puts him over the top for me is when he was with Philly, those 2 or 3 years, my daughter was first getting into sports, and she'd have her own softball practices. And I remember when him or Lee would pitch, we'd come home from practice at 8 o'clock, and I'd say, look, you know, the game already started, but you'll probably catch the last 6 innings if you go in and put it on right now. It would be 8:05, 8:10. They'd be in the 6th freaking inning already. These guys would have 54 pitches thrown and be through 5 innings. Yeah. And just the efficiency was amazing. And everything you were saying and everything I'm reading and everything like that leads me to believe he was the same way in Toronto.
Oh, yeah, definitely
That level of dominance can... I mean, it's a combination of consistency and dominance, and it's over this 10-year period of time that, for whatever reason, didn't start till he was 26 years old. To me, he's it. I don't think the Hall of Fame's incomplete without him, which is kind of always my argument with the Pete Rose thing, but that's a totally different subject. It's not incomplete without him, but if you got a few years into this, right, and he hadn't been selected, I kind of start to wonder, if not him, then who?
And that's the whole thing. That's my whole point to the. And again, we didn't really. I'm not saying you're fixating on this or anyone at the table's fixating on this, but I think generally speaking, the whole 200 wins thing there's a fixation on that, and no one's going to approach 300 again. So if
but what are we talking here? Are we talking in, or are we talking first ballot?
I'm saying in with, you know, without a shadow of a doubt.
I think but the original question was first ballot.
I'll just weigh in on that quickly.
I think first ballot is justifiable given his generational, where he sits in the generation.
Given the guys who have gotten in on the first ballot over the course of history, if he gets in on the first ballot, I'm not going to go protest in the streets or anything, but I would say that is strictly a sentimental call based on how his life ended.
Yeah. I hope that would not be the case. I mean, if anything,
that's just how I would feel about it.
Here's the thing, though. It's an interesting thing, and you know, I think there are going to be more people who vote against him. And this is with me without trying to give a guess as to how many votes he's going to get, right? So I personally think first ballot, he deserves it. I also think that there's going to be more people who are likely to vote against him because of the circumstance of his death, because he had drugs in his system. You know, not that he was doing coke, or, you know, there was needles in the friggin' plane or all this stuff, but he had amphetamines. He had drugs in his system.
Not that reminded me of anything, but Dwight Gooden's another one they compared him to.
Well, that dude.
Yeah, see, Dwight Gooden is the first ballot Hall of Famer, though.
See, I love Dwight Gooden.
I love Dwight Gooden too. I love Dwight Gooden too.
I like, my love for Dwight Gooden is that was like the first great pitcher I ever watched as a New York fan.
Does anyone disagree with that, though?
Here's why: he didn't do it for very long at all. That's my thing with Halladay. He did it for a long time. Gooden did it at a level that was immeasurable for 3 years. Halladay did it really freaking well.
And here's, you know, while we're in the conversation of drugs and whatnot, you know, there's every reason in the world to think that the reason Dwight Gooden didn't do it. And I love Dwight Gooden. He'll be one of my favorite athletes, even growing up as a Philadelphia Phillies fan. I've always loved Dwight Gooden. But the reason that he didn't do it for a number of years, most likely, is because of drugs. and that's a different, there's a different connotation there. I mean, drugs literally sabotaged that dude's career and life, and then he got his life back together a little bit, and then he went back to the Yankees. Well, no, I was saying he went back to the Yankees and was like a good pitcher again.
Now he's in his mid-50s, and he's about to get kicked off the Hall of Fame ballot altogether. Like, he's never gotten more than 30% of the votes. Like,
he doesn't have longevity. Yeah, but talk about the eye test and like.
He's one of those guys, and this I keep getting this off track.
It's him and Clemens neck and neck for about a solid
from 84 to 87, and then
extent.
Doc got arrested and everything changed around. But when I talk about like the Hall of Fame being complete or incomplete without a guy, like, it's hard for me to tell my story of watching baseball throughout my life without mentioning the name Dwight Gooden. Okay? Now, maybe that has to do with being a New York fan and all that stuff.
Like I said, I'm telling you from the Philadelphia Phillies perspective, and same age and everything like that, that guy was a rock star.
I believe.
He was a rock star.
I believe.
So, it only lasted for 3 or 4 years. By the time he was 26 years old, the poor freaking guy was spending his off seasons in jail and was not the same pitcher. The Mets end up dumping him for next to nothing. They did a whole 30 for 30 on Doc and Darryl, and it's like, if you were so inclined, like as a sports fan, it brings tears to your eyes to see the wasted talent there. And it's not even about the championships for the Mets; they got one. Like, we're not going to get greedy here,
right.
But you can't tell the story of the New York Mets franchise without those two guys. You can't tell a story of baseball in the 1980s without those two guys. But nobody voted for them for the Hall of Fame. So I feel
like you could tell it without Darryl Strawberry. I don't feel like that was a good player.
And I'm extremely biased because I was a 7-year-old kid who thought those two guys walked on water. And by the time I was 14, they were a punchline, right?
Right.
So Canseco's another guy like that. How the hell do you tell the story of the last 30 years in baseball without Jose Canseco?
First 40-40
But that's the thing. But Canseco, you tell the story of him. To some extent, his book is more of a footnote than his playing days.
But when you hear that word when you hear those words Hall of Fame, the word fame, right? Is Roy Halladay a more famous baseball player than Jose Canseco or than Dwight Gooden? I don't know. That was my thing with Eric Lindros when that debate was going on. Who was a more famous hockey player?
But here's the thing with baseball. Baseball, the baseball writers are so holy and above everything. You have to play the game the right way, and Halladay sure as hell did that.
Oh yeah.
So that's going to help him get in.
But they, the whole writers thing though, they've supposedly ushered out the whole holier than now thing. But even still, that's within the last couple of years, they've put more restrictions on people who can vote. Right, so if you haven't attended X amount of games or written X amount of clips or whatever the metrics are for that, you can't just hold on to your voting privileges for 100 years.
I would just like to say Gonzalo Levitard, I believe, has a Hall of Fame vote.
Gonzo?
Am I
so how about Super Grover?
I believe
Monster?
I believe he has a Hall of Fame vote and Dan Levitard does not.
That's not what I'm talking about. That's even worse that they would do that, because now you're getting people that are so focused on these stats. This is going to be a good argument for these guys.
The holier than thou thing, though, even if you take away the age of the writers who are voting and the age and the number of games they attend, even if you wipe that all away, there still is what they're handed is they get like the guidelines, and part of the integrity of the game is supposed to be. So they're supposed to consider integrity of the game, and so that it becomes the conversation always becomes, should that not be considered, or should it not be considered, or should it not be considered? As it stands right now, the people who vote have to consider it because it's there written as part of what they're supposed to consider. And then that you really get into murky waters though as to whether or not what he considers. I'm someone who would sit here right now and say, without really dissecting it, someone like Dwight Gooden, I'd be like, put him in the Hall of Fame. I'll be cool with it, because when he played, the guy was incredible. somebody like Rob mentioned Jose Canseco, who I actually at one point was a big fan of his as a kid when before it turned into steroids and drugs and all this stuff. But as I sit here right now, someone to me like Jose Canseco is an ass clown. Dwight Gooden is not. He's someone who I feel like just had more of a human demon that was harder to stop than someone who just injected steroids.
6 in one hand,
And
half
that,
dozen
exactly,
in the other.
exactly. I'm in no position to be a psychologist here or anything else. That's my gut reaction.
So as I look at this,
Integrity of the game, I guess neither one of them had it.
Right.
But I don't-
see what you're saying. Canseco he made a joke. He embarrassed everything that baseball stood for. I mean, he was an ass clown.
it's really hard to tell the story of baseball for the last 15 years without
Without him, though.
Yeah.
That's the thing.
And that's kind of what I always
motive-
thought
his
the
motive
Hall of Fame
sucked.
should be.
For the voters?
Like if I
Yeah.
walk in and out of this building and I spend a whole day there, do I feel like I have a grip on the
Again,
story of baseball?
Did Bonds do an
Yeah,
acceptance speech yet?
that's what I was gonna say.
No,
I've been to the
okay.
Baseball Hall of Fame,
So-
and there's no Barry Bonds
So,
in there.
yeah, Barry Bonds is the best player, period.
It's incomplete.
Period.
It's almost worthless to have Barry Bonds, the best player I ever saw. Mark McGwire and Sammy Sosa, the authors of the most captivating story
Season, yep.
I ever saw, and Roger Clemens, who's right up there for the best pitcher I ever saw,
Yeah.
and they're not there. It's part of baseball's story, that freaking steroid era, like everything. The Black Sox, like Shoeless Joe Jackson, who I obviously never saw play, but to keep him out of the Hall of Fame because of that, like, how are you going to tell your sports story? Everybody's got, like, shit, look at our country's history. Look at some of the black marks there. What are you going to do, pretend they never happened?
But that's the to me, and it's
Yeah,
Rob, you put it in a way that I never really thought about when you said famous. I've never once said to myself Hall of Famous, right? Okay, yeah, that's what fame is, right? But until you said that just a couple minutes ago, that never like seeped into my brain. Hall of Famous, and now with Shoeless Joe, everyone knows who he is. I mean, you could be these people are the history is not lost. They're just not in this enshrined hallway that as years go on, to some extent, in reality, let's face it, it does become less and less important.
So, are we comfortable considering the last 25 years the modern era? 30? What number do you guys want to go with?
I mean, at least 10 to 20, I think is
Okay,
fine.
let's do 20 then. I'm going to read you some names. Nolan Ryan,
And
Dennis Eckersley, Tom Glavine, Greg Maddux,
First ballot.
first ballot.
John Smoltz,
First ballot.
Pedro Martinez,
First
First
ballot.
ballot.
Randy Johnson.
First
First
ballot.
ballot.
Those names I just read you are the only pitchers to get in on the first ballot in the last 20 years. Halladay, in my opinion, pales in comparison to every one of them.
I don't know about it. I mean, I wouldn't say he pales to Eckersley. I wouldn't
Because
say
the greatest closers of all
Eckersley-
time. It's going to be the same thing as Rivera.
Eckersley kind of invented what closers are.
that's a fair point. That's a fair point. But let me put it to you this: looking at it through this lens, Eckersley invented what closers are. Right? Okay. That being said, if Eckersley never came along, would you think any less of Roy Halladay? I wouldn't put.
No,
Halladay
it's
against
not
him.
an apples to apples comparison.
Right.
Like nobody's choosing one or the other. What I'm saying is every one of those starting pitchers I mentioned. Let's just call it what it is. They have a better resume than Halladay. Nolan Ryan is who he is. Greg Maddux, John Smoltz, Martinez, the big unit. Those guys, they're on their own level.
Well, here's the thing, though.
Eckersley, to me, as a closer anyway,
Good.
he played a different position than Halladay.
Right.
He's evaluated
It
by a
is-
different set of criteria.
And to me, if I had to name one person who was the best pitcher that I've ever seen, right? I'm already on record with saying the best baseball player that I've ever seen is Griffey. That's unlikely to change. I would probably say that the best pitcher I have ever seen is Greg Maddux. Right?
Yeah, he's in my top three.
But putting him as a human being, as a human being pitcher up against Roy Halladay, the human being pitcher, there's things that Roy Halladay has accomplished that Greg Maddux not only could he never have accomplished, he just flat out didn't.
I mean,
Maddux is a longevity guy. Even more than Halladay. We talked about a couple minutes ago where Halladay, needed to wait till he was 25. I mean, without looking up his baseball card, it took Maddux longer really to acclimate himself, I think, in some regards, to the major leagues. But
Pedro
he's
was
a different type. He's another different type of pitcher. Pedro's probably the one guy who I'd say is probably head and shoulders above the rest, even if you factor in all the differences than that list that you just gave.
What's interesting is, to me, Randy Johnson's a specimen.
Yeah.
I mean, that's like
he's
that's like
comparable
the
to
Lawrence
Ryan.
Taylor
They just-
of baseball.
Weren't they on the same team at one point?
They were inhuman,
Nolan Ryan and
No,
Randy
Randy
Johnson.
Johnson and
and Clemens were.
no. Randy Johnson, well, him too, but Randy Johnson
And Pedro. It depends on how long you stay with the Expos, because I don't know the answer.
Yeah.
But so Randy Johnson, the day he was born, he was like, set by God to throw the ball 99 miles an hour and just blow people away.
He doesn't throw; he just hands the ball to home
Yeah,
plate.
and watching Randy Johnson, and that's an excellent point. Randy Johnson's the one guy I've gone and I've seen him pitch, and it's like I'll never forget, because literally sitting behind the first base dugout with that angle, it looked like somebody pitching an option.
It was an event. I mean, when he showed up as an event, I think I caught a couple of Nolan Ryan's performances. Event, Gooden, event,
Yeah, and Roger Clemens
event.
for over 20 years, steroids and no steroids, basically from the time he was a college-age kid to beyond my current age, dominated people physically.
Yeah.
That deserves to be appreciated. What I was going to say, though, is guys who I consider pitchers are your Pedros, your
Greg Maddux is a pitcher.
Maddux, and Halladay I put in that department, too, because they throw the ball faster than you and me, but they don't throw the ball faster than any other pitcher. If you pick a name out of a hat, I bet the other guy throws faster than Greg Maddux. I bet he throws as fast as Roy Halladay. Pedro threw pretty hard.
They were there for certain reasons, different reasons though. Maddux was a surgeon. Pedro threw hard. He's a little guy that threw hard, but he could sit there and locate. Halladay blew people away.
But with finesse too. That was the thing
Yeah.
with Halladay. At least by the time he got to Philadelphia, he was low 90s usually, 92, 94 maybe.
That wasn't him in Toronto.
Which now when I watch baseball, it's DeGrom, Syndergaard going 101, 102. These guys who are pitchers rather than hard throwers or physically dominant specimens, they take longer to develop. We all know about Maddux and how his career started in Chicago, but Pedro was like that. It just all came together. They thought Ramon was the better of the two brothers for a long time. And Halladay was in his mid-20s before he really got a chance with Toronto. How does that impact them from a whole fame perspective? Their primes are shorter. Randy Johnson pitched in the league forever. Ditto Roger Clemens.
Right.
Because physical domination doesn't go away until the physical skills go away.
Right.
There's not much to be learned when it's just gripping and ripping.
I mean, Pedro, I was just looking at some of Pedro's numbers. Him and Halladay compare pretty favorably. Pretty much when Pedro was fading out, his decade was over, and Halladay's decade was starting. Yeah. Pedro's got 219 wins. Halladay's got 203. It's pretty close.
See, that alone, that's a great stat. That alone, if you're going to make the wins argument,
I've already changed my mind. I got him first ballot.
I don't care how I take at it again.
I mean, I'm going to stick with what I said about first ballot. I think it could happen, but I think the sentimentality factor would be the biggest figure.
He died at the perfect time. I think it's going to help him get in.
I
don't know. I think it's going to help him get in.
Listen, I had
sympathy votes. I think it is going to help him get in.
Died at the perfect time.
But circumstances are what they are. I have these conversations with my friends who love music and everything, everybody talks about Nirvana being these big trendsetters, but if Billy Corgan blows his head off right after Siamese Dream comes out, how do we remember?
Right, that's a whole other conversation, but it's true.
This kind of stuff.
It's true. It's true. What happens if JFK lives or Lincoln lives a little longer? Their legacies might be changed.
What happens if a buffalo doesn't fart in China? Does Hurricane Katrina ever happen?
Oh my gosh. Yeah, what happens if no one ever talked about Y2K?
Y2K.
I wouldn't have a job.
Okay, so let's at least keep our promise. Keep our promise here to those who've been hanging in with us, and we want to thank Nippers again for having us. If you're hanging into the extra lengthy recording here of this podcast, the Markelle Fultz situation-ish. Rob, kick us off here, and is there anything that can surprise you anymore at this point? I mean,
yeah, one thing can surprise me, and that's the fact that people act like somebody did something wrong. I mean, I guess we'll recap as we sit here on Tuesday night. Sometime around lunch today, it was announced or decreed, or I don't even know what word to use, by Fultz and the people who represent him, that he would be seeing a shoulder specialist on Monday, and until that time, and perhaps beyond that time, he won't be participating in any basketball-related activities. Now, when I say it was decreed, what I mean is Elton Brand, Brett Brown, and the like found out about 3 seconds before me and Mike and Carlos and you did. It's a weird situation, and it's not one that I know has an easy solution or any solution at all, but the first thing I heard was, well, we shouldn't be surprised because the Sixers have mismanaged this from the jump. And my only response to that is, how do you properly manage the number one overall draft pick in a sport at the age of 19, suddenly forgetting how to play that sport?
Not only
Tell
that,
me what the proper way is to manage that.
but not only that, the consensus number one. Like, you know, it's not every year that there's a consensus number one. I mean, it's fairly frequent, but certainly not every year. He was a consensus number one pick.
So if someone wants to tell me where the blueprint was,
There is
that this has happened before and the Sixers should have followed it, then I'll agree with you. They've mismanaged it from the start. But I can't think of anything remotely close to this, even in the incredibly sordid and messed up history of Philadelphia sports.
Well, the mismanagement comes from trading up. You didn't have to trade up. You didn't have to give up anything, and you could have got a better player. Now, I know hindsight is whatever.
Right, because he was a consensus. That's the thing.
But he was the consensus number one, but you didn't have the number one pick, so you didn't have to jump up to get him.
Right.
That's the mismanagement.
Boston played a great game of poker, and that happens. That being said, for what the Sixers intended for Fultz at the time, not knowing that he was going to have the yips, it was a cool move I was cool with making. They didn't sit there and give up a ton for him.
We all sat here.
Yeah.
I think we were all pretty jazzed about the whole thing when it happened.
Right. That's
We're
the
all
thing.
a little apprehensive about dealing with Boston, and that turned out to be prescient.
Right, but it's not like A shot to say, oh, he's going to get the yips. You know, it just happened to work out that way, and that tends to work out in Asia's favor more often than not.
It's
but
amazing.
at the time, the move was right. The price for the move was right, and we were pretty much all satisfied.
Price wasn't exactly right. They're gonna
really
that
didn't give
Sacramento
up a whole
Kings
lot.
pick is gonna be worth something.
The thing is, so the Sixers were going to pick third, right? They were going to pick third in that draft, so they didn't pick third anymore. And they gave up the rights to, it was almost like we had seen that kind of thing for years. They were giving up the rights to the number 2 to the 5, right?
They weren't getting Fultz or Tatum until they made a move.
Well, no, because Lonzo was in there. Lonzo was the 2 pick.
They were,
Okay, then
So,
they were getting.
they
They weren't
could've
getting
had-
Tatum. They're getting Fultz regardless.
If I recall,
Because Boston was going to take Tatum regardless.
if I recall, the discussion
yeah, but the Sixers didn't know that.
Right, exactly.
Right.
The discussion revolved around, when they still had the 3 pick, at that time, the discussion revolved around, we don't need Jonathan Isaac or
Wasn't Fox in that? Was Fox?
Noah Vonleh.
Yeah.
Was he that year? We don't need them because we have a 4, we have a 5, obviously. And there were just so many questions because everybody seemed to think that if you didn't move up, there wouldn't be anybody worth the 3rd pick. It seemed like the whole time they were going to trade one way or another, and then it ended up being a trade up. But had they stayed at number 3, would Fultz have fallen into their lap? I mean, recent history suggests yes, they would have ended up with him either way. Because the Lakers were married to Lonzo from the start, and Boston
for different reasons altogether.
But
Right.
Boston was never going to take Tatum number 1.
Right.
They knew
They were going to
could
move somewhere.
back
Right.
and probably get.
And that's the thing, like, you'd have to think at this point, again, everything that we're talking about is hindsight related, but you'd have to think that if Boston didn't make the trade with the Sixers, that they were going to make the trade with somebody else.
So
and then,
Boston,
I think Tatum was basically projected to be like 6, 7, 8, 9, something like that.
can I ask you a question? If Boston could not have moved out of that spot, who would it taken?
It's a great question, and it's not one that I've ever
And maybe,
seen. Any
well, maybe
sort
they
of-
were
No
just
one knows.
maybe Ainge said to himself, "I'm trading something." Maybe he said to
Maybe.
himself, like, let's say that the floor for Tatum was 8 or 9. So maybe Ainge is sitting there and saying, "I'm going as low as 8 or 9."
The
Maybe
floor for Tatum is
No, I'm
3
saying
at worst.
I think
But
he was
coming
always
into-
the top 5 pick. I think
was
there
he
was
the
some,
floor was 5?
No, I think the
in
floor is
my
higher than
opinion.
5.
Yeah, I mean, I cannot
I
see
didn't
him
think it was
dropping
that
out of
high.
the top 5. Not with what I remember that year being. I mean, by the time you get to 7 or 8,
comparisons
that
with
year
Durant.
it was like, what was it, Kevin Knox and those guys?
Yeah.
I get my years confused with drafts.
People had Knox running up the board. You know what I mean? Like he had a
But
He
when
did.
you,
He went pretty high.
yeah.
when you look at the whole management of everything, maybe there should have been a red flag if Boston was so willing to trade its chief rival, the number 1 pick.
Yeah.
Maybe. I mean, yeah, and all that is 2020 in hindsight. And if that's where mismanagement comes in, fine, I'll hear that argument. But to think that there was some sort of blueprint to follow once everything started to go wrong is where I'm kind of like, come on.
No, exactly, and
Wow.
that's true. Like, what are you going to do with it? Like, you're not expecting somebody to come into the league with uncontrollable anxiety,
Damaged
which I
goods,
think is what it is.
damaged goods became damaged goods after
Happy Thanksgiving.
he got drafted. It wasn't before. It wasn't like you had to sit there and fix something. You thought you were sitting there against someone that you could sit and develop. Come to find out, and in the worst way possible, that dude has the yips.
It also didn't seem like Brown and Colangelo were on the same page because obviously he didn't want Fultz. He was going to run Simmons at the point, so why would you take a point guard? He had nowhere to put him on the court.
Right.
And then in the playoffs, he didn't even want to play him. He's been kind of stunning his growth. Now I know he has the yips or whatever, but he doesn't want him on the court. He's happy to have him off. He's happy to have him gone.
Absolutely.
I kind of felt like he went Larry Brown with that one. So remember when we had AI?
Larry
You
Hughes.
should go get Larry Hughes instead of sitting there and getting one of the greatest players of all time in Paul Pierce, which was the obvious pick. Just to combo guard someone that could sit there and interchange. It's like you basically overthink it, and I kind of think that's the route they went with that one. I'm not going to sit there and I don't believe Brett Brown just flat out did not want him.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think he didn't. It's not that he didn't want him. Maybe he doesn't want to deal with it now. I mean, I think from Brett,
clearly.
from his,
Yeah, once you sit there figure out you drafted a bust, yeah, I wouldn't say that.
but it's not even that. It's not even just that. Brett Brown. If you look at him and you look at the organization, Brett Brown could say, "Look, I've been playing tiddlywinks for friggin' like 7 years. Like I'm done." You know what I mean? Like especially like even if he could have crawled out of a sewer and said, I didn't deserve this. Like, I was fine with biding my time and whatever. You didn't fire me for a win-loss record and stuff like that. But I'm so done with this. Like the dude's getting grayer by the second. Like, and I can personally relate to that.
Okay, so please tell me where Brett Brown is going to go if they got rid of him.
Well,
I'm sorry, if he forced his way out. Please tell me where he's going to go. He's still
I don't have a
unproven
good
guy.
answer. I don't have a
The only
good
thing
answer.
you had going, the only thing he had going
Probably
for
go
him was
right to the
that
fucking bar.
he worked underneath Pop. That's the only thing he had going for him.
I
in that
know,
point.
but that's I know, and that's right. To some extent, it's only worth so much. But still, at the same time, if you look at the landscape of the NBA, I can't tell you where I think he would have ended up. But I have to think that someone there'd be at least be one team that would say goodbye, to whoever your coach is. We're going to take a risk on Brown.
I don't.
Not one.
No, I don't.
Not the Hornets.
No, because at that point he wasn't proven like that. All you know is that he was sitting there and coaching a dumpster fire of a team.
I know, but who the Hornets got?
I don't know. He was pretty well respected, and people knew the situation he was in. At the worst case, he could go back to Popovich.
Right, there you go.
There you go.
That's the answer. But yeah, at this point, yeah, he's definitely. I could see him definitely saying like, I'm done with this. And not the whole, but part of this whole thing is the PR aspect. And I think that when it comes down to just looking at Fultz in a bubble,
I thought you were going elsewhere with this one. Go ahead.
When it comes down to looking at Fultz in a bubble or a vacuum, I think part of the reason that the GM at the time made the trade was to kind of keep up with this PR thing, right? Because when you look at what happened, like Rob was saying earlier, and I think that we all acknowledged, like when the trade happened, everyone was kind of like, yeah, like Sixers are continuing to process and to roll into this and to that and the third. And I think the PR element of this really got in certain people's heads.
I disagree. I kind of felt like they had a vision, and Ben Simmons could have played point forward and still does play point forward. But at that point, how many 6'9" dudes do you need on the court? You know, you need to sit there and sort of diversify and get yourself in a position where you can sit there and play, you know, different ways, different styles of game. And the Fultz that we saw coming out of college would have allowed you to do that, because
right.
He could have sat there and played 1 or 2.
Right.
And he could have played both well. I mean, I would have said, my question would have been, how is he distributing the ball as a 1? And we still don't know the answer to that one. That being said, as a 2, you know, he's a guy that can get his own shot. And at this point, you already know Ben Simmons ain't shooting the ball. The reason why we were where we're at last season is because he couldn't finish those games. The reason why I'm excited about this season, even though we're nowhere near as deep, is because Jimmy Butler can finish those games. Markelle Fultz was supposed to be the guy that could sit there and finish those games. And once it came to fruition that was not going to be the case, then all of a sudden, you know, we're having these conversations.
Exactly.
But that was the intent of the draft pick at the time.
Right. Yeah.
So just let Fultz sit out the season, ride what we got. They're good. I mean, Butler made them a much better team, right?
Yes, but they're not
And Fultz
deep.
is a distraction.
They're not
Hurt, mentally messed up, and you can't trade him. You're not going to get anything for him. So just let him do his thing. Don't even worry about him. Try it next year again. See what happens.
I agree.
They still need shooters, and I feel like
you can trade for Bradley Beal, or you can bring someone else in here.
Even though you might get like 35 cents on the dollar, I keep hearing J.R. Smith. Honestly.
Oh no, I don't want that.
No. Bring Markelle Fultz back. Get Fultz back.
But even though you might get 35 cents on the dollar, if you can sit there and package him to get like a legit, you need another shooter.
And I mean, they're going to have to make another move, right? It's inevitable.
I think they're going to have to make 2.
A shooter and another
shooter. Yeah, literally, a shooter and another shooter. I mean, the way the team was constructed this year before they got Butler versus last year, and I might even still be inclined to sit there and say that the team last year is still better than the team this year, the way they were constructed.
I mean, Jimmy Butler puts you on a different type of level.
Jimmy Butler, his importance comes obviously on the defensive end too, but on the offensive end, at the end of the game, he's the guy that can actually get a shot, will actually get a shot, and has no problem shooting it.
Right.
That's what you don't have from last year. Because as good as Embiid is, Embiid can't bring the ball up the court.
Right.
You have to sit there and feed Embiid the ball in order for him to sit there and do what he needs to do.
It almost feels like, to what you're saying, if you looked at the roster on paper, you'd say, we're going to take last year's roster because of depth and shooters.
I'm taking last year's roster because it was perfectly tailored. I felt like if they had known, if Markelle Fultz was supposed to be who he's supposed to be, then all of a sudden there's no need to trade for Jimmy Butler.
But here's the
since
thing.
That's not the case, you had to trade for Jimmy Butler, but you did that while weakening your bench.
Right. Well, here's the thing, though. I feel like that even though on paper you'd look at last year's roster and say this is the roster to roll with, forget about just the team as it exists right now, whether Fultz is in the equation or not. You've added Butler. You've added a legitimate superstar, not an elite player, but a superstar. And now all of a sudden,
he's top 10. That's kind of elite to me.
It's pretty elite.
The line is thin between elite and superstar to me. I'm not gonna debate he's not an elite. What I'm saying is that by adding him, now all of a sudden you've gone from, even as much as you might have liked the full roster last year in scope, now you've added Jimmy Butler and taking it away from on paper in real life, he just changes the dynamic in so many ways that now you're like, okay, well,
so
we might look weaker on paper, but this guy can win us X amount of games.
Real life is this. Even with the game-winning shot he hit, this, that, whatever. Playoff NBA is different from regular season NBA, where everyone goes through the motions. Come playoff time, you're going to need to go more than 6 deep. That's where they're at right now. If that.
Totally understood, except that I would.
Boston buried you last year because they were hella deep. Toronto's going to bury you
with injuries.
Toronto's going to bury you this year because they're hella deep, and they got another guy that's basically wired the same way as Jimmy Butler.
I'm not going to debate that with you at all, except the fact that, and this is not a debate, it's just that it's different with the team that they have right now. Now you've got another elite guy or superstar guy, whatever you want to call him.
You got a closer
who, in the human being element of things, might blow rosters out of the water because you don't know what he's going to do day in and day out. He can take over a game, and that can in some instances.
He's going to play defense, and at the end of the game, he's going to give him the ball. You know exactly what he's going to do.
No, but what I'm saying is, to your point about a roster and depth, it's all true, and you want that going into a series or a season or whatever. But the human being element of it means that Jimmy Butler can just say, to hell with your roster. I'm going to take over this game, and we win it.
I get this, but that gets you in a position where you can sit there and be in that position where you need someone to take over the game in and game out come playoff time.
Yeah.
I don't know. I know. We can't sit there and consider this the regular season. It's a foregone conclusion. We're in the playoffs. Unless something catastrophically bad happens with someone getting injured, we're in the playoffs. It's a matter of how we do once we get there. So we assume first round we're going to sit there and get Indy or somebody lesser than them, and we're going to beat their backs out. That's the way that one's going to work. You get to the second round, then you get either Toronto, Boston, or Milwaukee.
Yeah.
You can't be an attractant with Milwaukee. We don't have the horses for that. To grind them down games with Boston and Toronto, that's where the depth comes into play, because it becomes a physical series. It becomes a series where you have to sit there and actually rest people. Jimmy Butler is 29. Thibodeau has ran his ass into the ground.
That's part of the equation. It certainly is.
You need that depth. So you can't just sit there and dismiss it just because Jimmy Butler is someone that can take over a game.
I'm not dismissing it. Just saying that it's different.
But you're not giving enough credit to it either.
I'm just saying. I'm just. What I'm saying is, I'm willing at this point to wait and see. I mean, we had more depth last year, and it didn't work out. That doesn't mean it wouldn't have worked out this year. I didn't want to lose Ilyasova, and
No, well, the linchpin for it working out this year was supposed to be Markelle Fultz getting his game right.
Right.
It didn't work, so we had to sit there and go to plan B. That part I get, but I'm not going to just sit there and ignore the fact that all of a sudden we're only a 6-deep team.
No,
and you can't win doing that.
I'm not saying they're going to win the East, and by any stretch of the imagination either. I'm just saying it's definitely it's obviously a new dynamic, and I feel like it's something that had to be done, and you see how it shakes out.
I feel like they're making 2 more moves.
Bring my boy Corver in, and I'll be a gym rat. I won't leave. It's been since Corver was in town since I had season tickets. And I will bebop and scat my way right down there.
Oh Lord!
All right. Well, if for no other reason, the MacBook is saying we got 8% of energy left.
Yeah, no, we have a DJ.
We gotta put a bow tie on this thing. Any other thoughts?
I have none.
All right, well, we'll be back at it next week. Want to thank them for having us once again. Jabronis.
Peace.